Hello friends, welcome to A Gentle Healing Journey. My name is Rain Francis, and on this channel I talk about how to deal with life's struggles and challenges. As I work through my psychology diploma and my life coaching certification, I'm happy to share my knowledge with you here in the YouTube community. I have a question. Do you ever have aches or pains or little problems, irritations, inflammation in your body, and you have no idea what's going on? A lot of the time we'll chalk this up to something we ate, or maybe we didn't sleep well, or maybe the S word, right? Stress. Well, I've been reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a wonderful book, and it's very, very informative about how trauma can nest itself in your body if you're unable to work through it. Now, this got me thinking about a certain ailment that I've been suffering with for years. I have a lot of digestive issues, and I've mentioned publicly before that I've been diagnosed with IBS. It's challenging, but if I keep up with my exercise and my self-maintenance program every day, and I avoid certain foods, I pretty much have it under control. But I have other digestive problems with my esophagus, where food gets stuck here at the base of the esophagus, and sometimes it'll stay stuck there for a really long time. There are certain foods that make it worse that I completely avoid now, but stress can also cause the base of my esophagus here to kind of clench and not allow any food or liquid to drop into my stomach. The worst instance of this happened in 2014. I had some guests over and I was making these amazing gourmet cheeseburgers. I took the first bite of my burger, and I'm a chewer, friends. I chew, knowing that I have this issue where food could possibly get stuck. But despite the small little bite and the enormous amount of chewing that I was doing, that little piece of hamburger got stuck at the base of my esophagus. It stayed there for over 24 hours, and I was unable to even drink water. I was just about to make the decision to go to the hospital when I felt an enormous pain in this area where my esophagus just finally opened up and it allowed the hamburger to drop down into my stomach. I haven't touched beef since 2014 because of that particular incident. It created such a fear in me that I would rather go without eating beef for the rest of my life than risk having that happen to me again. That fear is a combination of pain, of the food getting stuck, the anxiety that it causes, like the panic, and also the knowledge that if I have to go to the hospital, then I have to get an endoscopy. And for those of you who don't know, an endoscopy is when they put a tube down your throat, your esophagus, with a camera on it to see what's going on inside. And I've had that done 3 times, and I got to tell you, I don't ever want to go through that ever again. Whether this problem here is the result of trauma or not, I don't know. I'm not able to figure that out, but there are exercises in the book that you can do to help your body release hidden trauma. And I've started some of the exercises that the author recommended, and in a later video I'll discuss as to whether or not they've been helpful for me. But I would like to talk about another issue that I've had where I realized that trauma was causing a physical reaction in my body. I mentioned several digestive issues. And another issue I have in my esophagus is here, where I guess the throat and the esophagus meet. Without warning, when I try to swallow food, my esophagus just does this. It won't allow the food to go down. And it would just stay there. And I would have to, pardon the description, but bring it back up before it went into my throat. This is very traumatic for me to go through, and it happened so often. At one point, I didn't even want to eat anymore because I was terrified of eating. Either the food would not go down here, and I was at risk for choking, or it would get stuck right here, and I was at risk for having to go to the hospital to get an endoscopy done. Now again, as I've mentioned in other videos, I'm going to be very transparent and candid about my former relationship with my late husband. He was emotionally and verbally abusive towards me. And as I've mentioned also in other videos, it wasn't like that 24/7. I fell in love with a generous, wonderful, fun-loving, and affectionate man. And he was that man most of the relationship. But his own mental health challenges that were going untreated, and his own struggles and problems in his own life, including his upbringing, all of this contributed to him taking out a lot of his frustrations and anger on me through verbal and emotional abuse. He was also very manipulative, and in my opinion, that was due to his own lack of self-worth and lack of self-esteem. Often when he wanted something, he used manipulative tactics to get it. And a lot of the times, due to this behavior and his words, I felt like he hated me. But then he told me he loved me and he adored me. It was just really confusing, and it created a sense of always being really on edge. The worst of it was during the last 5 years that we were together. I was moving in a bit of a different direction. I was going back to school for my studies, and I was trying to start a business of my own. And I was very dedicated. And in hindsight, I can see that he was probably a bit nervous that I was going to kind of maybe leave him behind as I got more successful. In fact, he once told me that he felt like I was in the fast lane and he was stuck in the parking lot. Even though I assured him that I loved him and that if he treated me well, there would be no reason for me to want to ever leave him. But his insecurities always got the better of him, and he became more emotionally abusive and more verbally abusive during those last 5 years of our relationship. His mistreatment caused my own stress levels and anxiety like through the roof. And I tried many ways to treat myself through supplements, doing exercise, mindfulness practices, breathing practices, and even seeing social workers and therapists. But I had this underlying fear of standing up for myself in the relationship for fear of his retaliation. I mentioned in a previous video about being held emotionally hostage, that I felt like I was often walking on eggshells, like I was avoiding the next explosion by tippy-toeing around him. And this caused me so much stress, and it actually turned me silent. And this wasn't an unfounded fear. It was based on patterns. If, for example, he would accuse me of something that I didn't do or didn't say, I would immediately go into a stress response of fight or flight. And I would choose fight because I felt the need to defend myself against an unfair accusation. And when I say fight, I don't mean going in guns blazing. I just mean that I would say, no, I didn't do that. Well, I didn't say that. I defended myself. And because I didn't admit to what he was accusing me of, he would get angry and I would suffer retaliation, usually in the form of silent treatments. Sometimes he would want to fight with me for hours and follow me around until I was just exhausted emotionally. And I would just give in and say, yep, you're right. I did that. I'm sorry. I didn't admit to it earlier because I was just ashamed of myself. But this was just a way for me to stop the emotional torture. He got what he wanted, which was somehow wanting to bring me down. But my health was taking hit after hit, and this went on for years, to the point where instead of defending myself, I would just say, oh, I didn't realize that I did that or said that, and I'm sorry I upset you. Half the time, that was enough to stop his desire to have an argument, but the other half of the time, he would say that I was fake apologizing, which admittedly I was, but it was kind of a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So because of these experiences, I started to shut down more and more. I stopped standing up for myself. I stopped defending myself. I stopped expressing myself when something he did or said was harmful. I just kept quiet. But this took a real toll on this problem that I had here at the top of my esophagus. And because I felt ashamed of being in a relationship where I was being emotionally and verbally abused, I wasn't talking to anyone about it. I was keeping it all inside, and it was during those years of me being silent about everything that this problem here in my esophagus got worse. It got to the point where I was on a liquid diet only, and unfortunately that included alcohol, because I thought that would help me to calm down enough so that I could swallow solid food. I know it was unhealthy, but I couldn't figure out any other way. I had had a work-related burnout years earlier, and I had been on a lot of medication at that time, and the side effects for me were just horrendous. So I had promised myself, no matter what, I would not go on those types of medications again. But instead, I opted for self-medication, which was drinking alcohol to try to calm myself down enough to eat. And I knew that this was not going to work long term, and I was desperate to talk to somebody about what was going on in my marriage. And it's always worth mentioning that it doesn't happen every single day. We had months, we even had a year one time without any issues, but they always came back. And at one point I decided to call an anonymous hotline and talk to someone anonymously. And I remember sneaking out of the house, getting into the car to make that call. And I was on the phone for probably at least an hour. I was pouring out my heart and my soul. And this was the beginning of me opening up and speaking my truth and talking about my struggles and challenges, my disappointments and sadness. And I also talked about how I felt so embarrassed and ashamed, and I didn't want anyone I knew to know what I was going through. After the anonymous hotlines, I graduated to talking to a social worker. And I went to see a social worker once a week for quite a bit of time. And at this point, I had told my husband that I was going to see someone to help me because I was struggling with the way he was treating me. He didn't receive that very well, and he told me that all they're going to do was to blame him for everything. Now, I'm not the type of person who's going to blame myself for being in any kind of abusive situation, but I am open-minded enough to realize that over the years, I taught him what he could get away with. And now I was trying to rectify all of that by talking to a social worker and trying to get help on what I could do, because I still wanted to stay in the marriage. I really genuinely wanted to work things out in my relationship. Now, the social worker I was seeing, he couldn't understand why I wanted to stay in the marriage. And he told me flat out, you need to break the marriage up and divorce. And I don't think this was very good advice, because a social worker shouldn't be telling you what to do. Anyway, I gave that up, and I started to read books and to watch YouTube channels about emotionally abusive relationships. I tried every tip and trick that I learned to manage being in a relationship with a difficult and antagonistic person. Some of these methods worked, but they didn't work consistently. And it was with time and education and finally opening up to very close friends about what was really going on that I realized I'm not responsible to change his behavior. I always felt like I was the problem because for many years that's what I was told, so I wanted to fix it. But when all of these realizations came to mind, I started to become more confident, and I was stronger, and I didn't allow his attempts to bring me down to actually bring me down anymore. Unfortunately, this made him escalate the abuse the last 5 years that we were together. The silent treatments got longer. The arguments got more intense and aggressive and longer, and there were threats, so I had to call the police. And over the last 3 years that we were together, I did ask him to move out 3 times. The first 2 times, he threatened suicide, and I gave in out of fear and guilt. But the last time in 2025, I didn't give in, but unfortunately, he did follow through on his threat to take his life. And over the last year or so, he passed away in May of 25. I've been actively working on my grief and working through that trauma that was left behind for having found him after he took his life. And the whole mess of being in an emotionally and verbally abusive relationship for so long. But I've worked really hard on this, and something happened about a month ago that I noticed. I don't have this problem anymore in my upper esophagus where food used to get stuck. Magically, one day I was just eating a sandwich, something that I would never have dared do before, but I just felt like having one. I was craving one, so I made one. I wasn't actively thinking that this might be a mistake and that it would get stuck here, but I was eating it and I had no problems, and I thought, that was a really good sandwich. And then it dawned on me, oh my gosh, I didn't have to choke it down. So I was thinking about that and realizing that I'd actually had several meals in the past month or so where I never would have dared have those meals before due to being afraid of the food getting stuck. And could that problem actually have been gone now? Could it be that my problem was caused by the fact that I wasn't speaking my voice? I wasn't speaking my truth, and I was staying silent all those years? Most of you know the ancient Indian framework of 7 main energy centers called the chakra system. Each of these chakras or energy centers, they influence you physically, emotionally, and they influence your spiritual well-being. The throat chakra, or the Vishuddha, is associated with expression and truth. When it's open, we can communicate our truth clearly and effectively. But when it's blocked, we struggle to share authentically. Now, I'm someone who believes that our body is just a big bundle of energy, and that energy flows through our body all of the time, constantly. So the belief system of the chakras really resonates with me, and I feel as though my throat chakra, or my ability to communicate my truth clearly and effectively, was blocked for so many years that it started to affect me physically in this area. Because once the problem was out of my life, and once I was able to start working through all of the grief and the trauma, suddenly I'm not having a problem swallowing food anymore. I'm also someone who doesn't necessarily believe in coincidence. Was it just a coincidence that I was able to swallow food again 9 short months after the source of my struggles was finally out of my life? It really got me thinking. And after reading the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and understanding that when we go through traumatic events, our body holds on to that trauma if we haven't worked through it, I realized that yes, my throat was keeping the score. I was unable to use my voice safely for so many years. And because of that, it was blocked to the point where I couldn't even swallow solid food for most of the time. So I am convinced that when we go through emotional and mental struggles, it will affect us physically. I think we can all agree to some level that this is truth. If we're feeling emotionally or mentally exhausted, we might have a tummy ache or we might have a headache. If we're nervous, we feel butterflies in our stomach, that's anxiety. It becomes a physical reaction. So why wouldn't it be true that our body holds on to trauma and grief? It's just an interesting thing to think about. The book can be technical at some points, but overall it's pretty easy to understand, and it's very, very, very informative, like I said. Now, I'm not promoting this book, but I just wanted to share this with you because I do believe that, as the title of the book says, the body does keep the score. And if we don't try to work through our trauma, if we try to dismiss it, ignore it, escape from it, our body is going to remind us that it's still there on some level. It was just fantastically eye-opening for me to realize that this problem that I'd had for over a decade is gone. At one point, I kind of felt a little regret that I didn't realize the connection sooner, but you know what? Sometimes we have to go through things the hard way to learn something from the experience. And I've learned that I should never be silent, that I should never hold my tongue for fear of retaliation. Now, of course, we're not talking about a situation where there is violence threatening your life, okay? I'm talking about a situation like this one, the one I was in a relationship where I was being accused of things that I never did, never said, never thought, and not standing up for myself and standing my ground and saying, no, that's not who I am. You're wrong about me. Instead, I gave in and my body kept the score. Of course, in any relationship, you have to pick your battles, right? But if you're in a relationship where you often are being told that you're wrong, you're being accused of something you didn't do, you're being blamed for something that wasn't your fault, it's important to stand up for yourself. You need to stand your ground and say, no, that's not true about me. So I wonder, friends, is there an ailment or an issue that you're having in your body that could possibly be the result of untreated trauma? Sometimes we have trauma really tucked neatly away in our unconscious mind, and it's stuck there because that's what our brain wanted to do to keep us safe, to put it back there. An example of this is childhood abuse. A lot of the times we don't remember the specifics about the abuse because our brain is trying to protect us and keep us safe from that trauma. But this trauma could be coming out in other ways in our body. I read a statistic that said that survivors of childhood abuse are at a higher risk of autoimmune disease. This is not somebody's opinion, my friends. This is based on scientific evidence. And it's astounding to me to think that our autoimmune system can be affected by childhood abuse. Our brains and our bodies are just fascinating. Like, these are our vessels here on earth, and we have to take good care of them while we still have them. I guess, in closing, my point of sharing all of this, my own story with you and talking to you about this book that I read, it's trying to engage you into thinking that maybe there's some trauma in your life that you haven't dealt with, and maybe it's coming out as disease in the body or an issue in the body like mine where you can't swallow food because you haven't been speaking your truth or using your voice. So that's a little food for thought for you today, my friends. Sorry for the pun. I can share one exercise with you that I've been doing that I believe has contributed to this problem here in my upper esophagus to disappear. And this wasn't in the book. It was, I can't remember where I read it, but it was, I'm trying to remember. But if you want to unblock your throat chakra, start singing every day. And I've been doing that for months. Bohemian Rhapsody, singing it every day, releasing any blockage in my throat. Has it helped in contributing to the fact that I no longer have this problem swallowing food? Maybe. If ever you'd like to send me a message, friends, or ask me to discuss a topic, please feel free to leave comments in the videos. And if you want to send me an email, check out my channel description. That's where you'll find my email address. So again, my friends, I hope that by sharing this with you, you were able to take something thoughtful from it. Thank you so much for watching. Please be well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.